Welcome to this lesson in which we shall be taking an in-depth look at communicative language teaching, or CLT for short, which is an approach to language teaching that arose in response to a need. The need in question is, of course, communication. Now we have to remember that this is an intensely practical course that has as its main goal the improvement of teachers' performance in the classroom. So how exactly are you going to use CLT as part of your everyday activities? Well, first, you have to understand the difference between the need for grammatical competence and communicative competence. Both are important in any linguistic scenario, obviously, but CLT stresses communicative competence, as you may have worked out from its name. And it's not simply about what we say. It's also about how and when to say it. When you are asking a question, for example, the tone of your voice is going to sound completely different from your tone when you are simply stating a fact, or, for that matter, giving a command, as we teachers often do in our classrooms. Furthermore, we have to allow for register, which means how we speak to people depending on the situation at the time. When you are sitting drinking in a shebeen, you will obviously use informal language. But when you are in the principal's office, or maybe giving a speech at the school prize giving, the language that you use is going to sound much more formal, isn't it? Remember also that language isn't only about speech, it's also about reading and writing. Although, having said that, it's important to stress that all language begins as speech, not writing. And as teachers, we must always bear this in mind. But as we were saying, without the ability to read and write in English, contemporary schooling is effectively impossible for anyone. So what does this mean for the teacher in the classroom? Well, the main difference for us is that we are expected to be learning facilitators in a learner-centered teaching environment, which is simply a fancy way of saying that we must keep the children busy with valid activities so that, as far as possible, they learn by themselves. And it's this basic concept that makes the whole CLT approach so effective. Think about it. It's common sense. A busy class is a happy class. This means also that what we teach should change. Now you're going to, hopefully, read all the lists and stuff in the handbooks, so I'm not going to go through them with you in detail. But let's look at a few of the most important aspects. For me, the key to the entire approach is to encourage participation, whether it's spoken or written. And this is going to result in experimentation, which in turn is going to result in mistakes. Lots of mistakes. Do not attempt to correct them all immediately. Sort them out in a later lesson. Let me tell you a story. Many years ago, when I was working in our family business in Lesotho, which is my favorite country after the Free State, and naturally enough, I attempted to learn Sesotho, but it was many years before I succeeded in the attempt. One of my colleagues, who shall be nameless, insisted on correcting every single language and pronunciation error that he heard, which was so irritating and boring that eventually I refused to speak the language at all. But at least that negative experience taught me what to avoid doing in the classroom. Anyway, let's move on. Next, we have what's called the integrated skills approach. Don't you just love all these complicated sounding terms? In simple English, this means that we have to teach all aspects of language, that is, listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And we are meant to do this inductively. In other words, we should provide the children with authentic examples of the language, which will allow them to work out the rules for themselves. We're going to look at this in detail later, by the way. It's not as complicated as it sounds, and it works brilliantly if you can get the technique right. Now, in your notes are listed many different tasks and activities, far more than we can investigate in detail in this brief session. But you are absolutely going to love them. One of the biggest advantages of communicative language teaching is the F factor, fun. And these activities will make it possible for you to make your classroom a place which the children will associate with pleasure. So if you think that CLT is so effective, which I do, then why do so many teachers struggle to use the method in their classrooms? Now, this is reality. We must address this. As is the case with any theory-based approach, it fails to take into account many of the contextual factors which we face daily in our classrooms. The worst problem is the size of our classes, which in South Africa today is set at 42 scholars to 1 teacher. But when CLT was first formulated, the stipulated maximum size of a class was set at 20 for proper teaching and learning to take place. The number could possibly be increased to 30 if the teacher was an absolute tyrant who literally ruled with a rod of discipline. But any number beyond this was simply considered to be time wasting. Then there's the aspect of medium of instruction. In grade 12, and let's face it, everything we do at school is preparation for those critical, vital, final exams. 6 of the 7 subjects are going to be written in the first additional language, that is English. And the other teachers rely on us to ensure that their candidates are able to answer their question papers. Can they, for example, write an argumentative and discursive essay? Are they able to use prepositions correctly? The problem here is that most of the summative assessment in grade 12 is written, not oral, and CLT does not allow for this. The worst problem, though, is that the theorists who conceived CLT in the first place, who apparently enjoyed the flavor of those pretty red mushrooms with the white dots on them, were convinced that first additional language scholars would learn the grammar of the language from their peers. Well, no, sorry, but they don't. The blind cannot lead the blind. Well, there we go. That's communicative language teaching, and it's not faultless, but very useful indeed. Go through the notes and see what you can use in your classroom, because that's what this course is all about, improving your teaching. See you shortly.